The day the aliens arrived changed everything. Their ship, a sleek metal craft called the Bright Horizon, settled into Earth orbit on a quiet Tuesday morning. Most humans watched the news in shock as the alien vessel released smaller shuttles that descended toward the United Nations headquarters in New York. Jack Miller had been a Marine for 15 years before joining the newly formed Space Defense Force. At 40, with short, gray-peppered hair and eyes that had seen too much combat, he wasn't easily impressed. Yet even he felt his pulse quicken as he stood in the reception line with the other chosen military representatives. "Remember, no sudden movements," whispered Commander Susan Reed, the team leader. Her dark uniform was perfectly pressed, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun. "These excursions are supposedly peaceful, but they're still an unknown." Jack nodded, keeping his face neutral as the large doors at the end of the hall slid open. The aliens who entered weren't what he expected. They walked on two legs like humans, but their skin resembled burnished copper scales. Their eyes, 3 of them, blinked vertically across faces that seemed too wide for their tall, lean bodies. "Greetings from the Galactic Federation," said the lead alien. Its voice came through a small device at its throat, translated into flawless English. "I am Captain Zorn of the Exertion Fleet. We have come to welcome humanity to the greater community of spacefaring species." The human diplomat stepped forward first, exchanging formal words of welcome. Jack and the other military personnel remained at attention, studying the visitors. Behind Captain Zorn stood representatives from 2 other alien species, the Polarians with their translucent blue skin that pulsed with light, and the Vexians who moved with unsettling grace on their 6 limbs. After the initial greetings, Captain Zorn approached the military line. He stopped in front of Jack, all 3 eyes blinking in sequence. "You are warriors," the alien stated, not a question. "We are soldiers," Susan corrected politely. "Defenders." The alien made a clicking sound that the translator didn't catch. "It is good to meet fellow warriors. The galaxy has many dangers. The Federation protects the civilized races from threats like the Hive." "The Hive?" Jack asked, speaking for the first time. Captain Zorn's scaled skin rippled slightly. "A collective species that consumes rather than cooperates. They have threatened our borders for centuries. Your species will be safer under Federation protection." Something in the alien's tone bothered Jack, a hint of superiority that reminded him of colonial powers from Earth's own history. Within days, arrangements were made. A small group of humans would join the Exertion ship as liaisons while diplomatic relations were established. Jack wasn't surprised when he was selected along with Susan Reed. "They want to study us," Susan told him as they packed their gear. "Figure out what we're capable of, while showing us how much more advanced they are," Jack added. Their shuttle docked with the Bright Horizon a week later. The ship was enormous inside, with curved corridors that seemed to flow rather than connect at angles. The alien crew watched them with obvious curiosity, some making those untranslatable clicking sounds when they passed. Captain Zorn assigned them quarters near the command center. "You will observe our operations and learn Federation protocols," he explained. "In time, your species may qualify for full membership." "What does that require?" asked Susan. "Cultural maturity, technological advancement, understanding of certain universal truths," Zorn replied. "Your species is young, but promising." Jack caught Susan's eye. The message was clear. They were being treated like clever children by a species that saw itself as superior. That night, alone in his quarters, Jack stared out a viewport at the stars. Earth was just a blue dot from here. He wondered what these aliens would think if they knew humanity's full history, not just the diplomatic version they'd been shown, but the brutal, determined struggle that had shaped his species into survivors. He had a feeling they might learn soon enough. 3 weeks passed on the Bright Horizon as Jack and Susan settled into their roles. The humans learned quickly, adapting to alien technology and customs faster than Captain Zorn had expected. Jack spent most of his time in the combat training facility, observing the Federation soldiers' fighting techniques, while occasionally demonstrating human martial arts when asked. The aliens were physically impressive. The Exercians possessed natural armor and strength that made them formidable in close combat. The Polarians could alter their body density, becoming nearly intangible to avoid strikes before solidifying to deliver powerful counterattacks. The six-armed Vexians moved with blinding speed, their reflexes far quicker than any humans. Your species relies heavily on weapons, noted Lieutenant Krex, a young Exercian officer who had become something of a guide for Jack. His scales were lighter than his older counterparts, almost bronze instead of copper. Is it because of your physical limitations? Jack shrugged, used to these subtle jabs. We work with what we have. Of course, Krex said quickly. All species must adapt. The Federation values diversity of approach. But Jack had noticed how the aliens always spoke of human contributions in theoretical terms, while discussing their own accomplishments as proven facts. There was always that undercurrent of condescension. That changed on the 23rd day, when the ship's alarms blared without warning. Jack was eating in the mess hall with Susan when red lights began pulsing across all surfaces. They followed the rushing crew members to the command center, where Captain Zorn stood before a large holographic display showing multiple red markers converging on a green one. The Hive has broken through the outer defense network, Zorn announced as they entered. They've attacked Outpost Delta 7 at the edge of the Proxima system. Susan stepped forward. That's close to Earth. Zorn's three eyes blinked rapidly. Yes, it appears Earth's discovery may have triggered this incursion. The Hive often targets newly contacted worlds. Are Earth defenses being alerted? Jack asked, keeping his voice steady despite the spike of concern. Federation protocol dictates we handle this directly, said Commander Voles, a high-ranking Polarian whose skin pulsed with agitated red lights. Informing undeveloped worlds of combat operations would only cause panic. Jack exchanged a glance with Susan. They were being shut out of decisions affecting their own planet. Captain, Susan said formally, as Earth representatives, we request to be included in all strategic planning regarding this threat. A tense silence followed. Finally, Captain Zorn nodded. You may observe the War Council. Your input will be considered. The Council convened in a circular chamber where holographic displays showed the advancing Hive forces. Dozens of ships shaped like segmented insects, moving in perfect coordination. Federation commanders argued strategy, occasionally lapsing into their native languages when emotions ran high. The Hive uses overwhelming numbers, explained Commander Voles to the humans. They sacrifice drones without hesitation to achieve objectives. Their collective mind makes them fearless. All species feel fear, Jack commented quietly. Several alien officers made dismissive gestures. The Hive consciousness does not value individual survival, stated a Vexian major, her 6 limbs moving in agitation. This is well documented through centuries of conflict. We will intercept them before they reach Proxima, Captain Zorn decided. The Bright Horizon will join the 5th Fleet at these coordinates. As the meeting ended, Lieutenant Krex approached Jack in the corridor. This will be your first time seeing real combat in space, the young Exercian said. Do not be alarmed. The Federation has defeated the Hive many times. Jack nodded politely, but something in Krex's nervous tone suggested this situation was more serious than they were admitting. That night, he found Susan in the observation deck, staring at the stars. They're not telling us everything, she said without turning. No, Jack agreed. But I think they're about to learn something about humans too. The ship's engines hummed louder as the Bright Horizon accelerated toward what Jack suspected would be much more than a simple intercepting action. The journey to the interception point would take 3 days. Tension grew among the crew as they prepared for battle. Equipment was checked, weapons calibrated, and battle stations assigned. Jack noticed the increased activity with a soldier's eye, recognizing the controlled anxiety that preceded combat. On the second night, Jack wandered into what the aliens called the Restoration Chamber. essentially a recreation room where off-duty crew members gathered. Several Federation soldiers sat in a rough circle, sharing food and drinks from their respective worlds. Lieutenant Krex spotted Jack and waved him over. "Join us, human," Krex called. "We share stories before battle. It is tradition." Jack nodded and took a seat in the circle. Susan arrived moments later, sliding into place beside him. They were the only humans among about 15 aliens of various species. "We were just hearing about the Battle of Vex Prime," Krex explained, gesturing to a senior Vexian officer whose arms bore ornate markings. Major Silt was describing how her unit held the Spinward Gate against 50 hive vessels. The Vexian inclined her head. "We lost many, but not a single hive ship breached our line. This is the way of Vexian warriors since the ancient times of our first queen." A Polarian with unusually bright skin patterns leaned forward. "My grandfather commanded the orbital defense of Polar during the Third Hive War. When his flagship was damaged, he merged his body with the ship's control systems to maintain function until reinforcements arrived. He sacrificed his physical form but saved 16 million lives." The aliens nodded respectfully. Jack recognized the ritual for what it was: soldiers sharing their people's bravery, connecting their coming battle to their proud histories. "What about humans?" asked a young Xerxian engineer. "Do your people have battle stories?" All eyes turned to Jack and Susan. Jack felt Susan tense beside him, always careful about how much Earth information they shared. "We have many," Jack said simply. "Your species has only recently achieved space travel," commented Commander Voles, who had joined the gathering quietly. "Your battles must be primitive by comparison." Jack kept his expression neutral. "We fought on land, sea, and air instead of space. The principles remain similar." "Tell us one battle," urged Krex, seeming genuinely interested. "How do humans fight when outmatched?" Susan gave Jack a slight nod, permission to share. "There was a battle called Thermopylae," Jack began. "A small force of warriors called Spartans faced an army that outnumbered them by more than 100 to 1. "And they were victorious?" asked Vexian skeptically. "They all died," Jack said. "But they held their position for 3 days, allowing their civilization to prepare a proper defense. They sacrificed themselves knowing they couldn't win." The aliens exchanged glances. Another time, at a place called the Alamo, a few dozen soldiers held off an army for 13 days, despite having no hope of survival. Jack continued. Commander Voles made a dismissive gesture. "These sound like myths created to inspire rather than actual military accounts." "They're documented history," Susan added quietly. A Polarian officer's skin flickered with amusement patterns. "All young species blend myth and history. It is natural to exaggerate past glories." "We don't need to exaggerate," Jack said, his voice even. "Human history has enough real examples of standing against impossible odds." "Perhaps," said Commander Voles, standing to leave. "But facing the Hive is unlike anything in your planetary conflicts. Their drones feel no fear, no pain, no hesitation. They are the perfect enemy." After the commander left, the gathering grew quieter, more subdued. Jack could feel the alien soldiers watching him and Susan with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "Get some rest," advised Krex kindly. "Tomorrow we reach the battle zone, and you will see how the Federation truly fights." As they walked back to their quarters, Susan whispered, "They think we're children playing at war." Jack nodded. "Let's hope they never have to find out how wrong they are." The Bright Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a shudder that ran through the entire ship. Jack gripped the edge of his station on the command deck, watching as the main view screen showed their arrival point, an asteroid field orbiting a small red dwarf star. "Where's the rest of the fleet?" Susan asked, voicing the question before Jack could. Captain Zorn's scales darkened with concern. "They should be here. Scan for debris." The command center fell silent as the sensor operators worked. Jack studied the tactical display, noting their isolated position and the limited escape vectors through the asteroid field. Captain, called a Polarian officer, her skin pulsing with alarm patterns, were detecting hive energy signatures. Multiple vessels approaching from behind the largest asteroids. "It's an ambush," Jack said quietly. Zorn shot him a look with all three eyes. Battle stations, all crews to defensive positions. The ship transformed instantly as soldiers rushed to their posts. Jack and Susan were directed to a secondary command post where they could observe without interfering. Lieutenant Krex joined them as their liaison. "This doesn't make sense," Krex muttered. "The hive shouldn't have known our rendezvous point." The first impact hit before anyone could respond. The ship rocked violently as hive energy weapons struck their port side. Artificial gravity flickered, and emergency lighting bathed everything in red. "Shields at 60%, reported a Vexian officer, her 6 arms working multiple control surfaces simultaneously. 3 hive destroyers confirmed, plus multiple drone ships. Captain Zorn's voice came over the ship-wide communication system. "All personnel, prepare for emergency landing. We cannot outrun them in open space." Jack turned to Krex. "Landing? Where?" The young Xerxian pointed to a large asteroid on the tactical display. "That one has an atmosphere pocket on its dark side. Thin, but breathable for all our species." The next few minutes were chaos as the Bright Horizon dove toward the asteroid, taking hit after hit from pursuing hive vessels. Jack felt the ship shudder as weapon systems fired back, destroying several smaller drone ships. But the main hive destroyers kept coming. The landing was more controlled crash than gentle touchdown. Jack helped Susan up from where they'd been thrown to the floor, checking her for injuries. "I'm fine," she insisted, wiping blood from a small cut on her forehead. "What's the plan now?" Captain Zorn's voice crackled over emergency channels. "All crew, abandon ship with combat gear. Establish defensive perimeter around the craft. Engineering team, begin emergency repairs." They grabbed their Federation-issued weapons and emergency packs before following Krex through smoke-filled corridors to an exit hatch. Outside, the asteroid's surface was dark gray rock under a thin, hazy atmosphere. The ship had come down in a small canyon that provided some natural cover. Federation soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, setting up defense points using rocks and equipment salvaged from the ship. Jack noted their textbook formation with approval. The aliens might be condescending, but they were professional soldiers. The first wave of hive drones appeared less than an hour later, scuttling, insect-like creatures with multiple limbs and chitinous armor. They poured over the ridge above the canyon in a dark wave. "Hold positions," shouted Commander Voles, his translucent skin now glowing bright battle red. Coordinated fire. Energy weapons flashed as the Federation soldiers opened fire. The front line of hive drones collapsed, but more simply climbed over their fallen, never slowing their advance. Jack and Susan took positions behind a makeshift barricade, firing steadily at the oncoming horde. Their Federation weapons hummed with each shot, cutting down drones with precision. "There's too many," Krex said between shots, his young voice strained. Jack didn't respond, conserving energy as he aimed and fired in a rhythm as old as warfare itself. The wave of drones hit their first defensive line, and the sound of close-quarters combat filled the air. The clatter of chitinous bodies, energy weapons discharging, and the unmistakable cries of the wounded. The battle for survival had begun. Night fell on the asteroid, if such a thing could be called night. The red dwarf star disappeared behind the curve of the rock, plunging their position into darkness broken only by emergency lights and the occasional flash of energy weapons at the perimeter. The first hive attack had been repelled, but at a terrible cost. Nearly 20% of the Federation forces were dead or severely wounded. The alien soldiers retreated to a tighter defensive position around the damaged ship, carrying their injured comrades. Jack helped establish a medical area inside a small cave formed by fallen boulders near the ship's hull. Susan worked alongside the Federation medics, applying her basic field medicine training to alien physiologies as best she could. "How bad?" Jack asked her quietly when they had a moment alone. Susan wiped alien blood from her hands. "Bad. They've lost more soldiers in this one battle than in their last 3 engagements combined, according to the medic. They're not used to these casualties." Captain Zorn called the surviving officers to a strategy meeting in what remained of the ship's command center. Jack and Susan joined them, standing at the back as the alien commanders assessed their situation. "Repair teams estimate 28 hours until we can achieve minimal flight capability," reported the chief engineer, a Vexian whose normally precise movements were now sluggish with exhaustion. "We will not survive another 28 hours, stated Commander Voles flatly. His skin barely glowed now, a sign of extreme fatigue among Polarians. "The second wave of drones will come at dawn. Our ammunition is limited, and we have too many wounded to maintain a full perimeter." Captain Zorn's scales had dulled to a dark bronze. "We must hold until the Federation fleet locates us. They will be searching when we fail to make the rendezvous." "The Hive will find us first," said a Xerxian lieutenant, voicing what everyone was thinking. Silence fell over the group. Jack glanced at Susan, who nodded slightly. He stepped forward. "Captain, with permission, I'd like to share something." Zorn blinked slowly. "This is hardly the time for human observations, Miller." "It's exactly the time," Jack insisted. "Your soldiers are losing hope. I've seen this before." The alien captain stared at him, then gestured for him to continue. Jack looked around at the gathered officers. "Yesterday, you dismissed human battle stories as myths. But there's something you should understand about humans in hopeless situations." He moved to the tactical display, bringing up the terrain map of their position. "In Earth's history, there was a battle called Chosin Reservoir. 15,000 human soldiers were surrounded by over 120,000 enemies in terrain like this, cold, mountainous, with limited supplies. And they all died heroically," asked Lieutenant Krex bitterly. "No," Jack said. "They fought their way out. Over 2 weeks, through enemy lines, carrying their wounded, in temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin. They didn't just survive. They inflicted such heavy losses that their enemies couldn't effectively pursue them." The alien officers exchanged glances. "What's your point, Miller?" Commander Voles demanded. "My point is that humans don't accept no-win scenarios," Jack replied. "We've faced extinction-level threats throughout our history, not just from enemies, but from our own planet. Ice ages, plagues, world wars. We survived because we refused to accept defeat." "Fine words," Captain Zorn said, "but we need strategy, not inspiration." Susan stepped forward. "We have a strategy. But you won't like it because it doesn't follow Federation doctrine." "We have doctrine because it works," a Vexian officer protested. "It works against enemies that think like you do," Jack countered. "The Hive doesn't. But humans have fought enemies like them before, opponents who have superior numbers and no fear of death." Captain Zorn studied the humans with all 3 eyes. Jack saw something change in the alien's expression, the condescension giving way to desperate hope. "What do you propose?" Zorn finally asked. Jack smiled grimly. "Something very human. We're going to set a trap. This plan violates every principle of Federation combat doctrine," Captain Zorn said, his scales darkening as he studied the diagram Jack had drawn in the dirt. They stood in a small clearing behind their defensive line. Dawn approached, and with it, the inevitable second Hive attack. Federation soldiers worked frantically nearby, following Jack and Susan's instructions despite their obvious doubts. Federation doctrine wasn't written for this situation. Susan replied calmly, "You fight to win cleanly. We're fighting to survive." Jack pointed to key positions on his crude map. The Hive attacks in waves, always taking the most direct path to their target. They don't expect tricks because they have no concept of self-preservation. Lieutenant Krex frowned. "But deliberately weakening our center line. The drones will break through immediately." "That's the point," Jack explained patiently. "They'll think they've won and pour all their forces through the gap. That's when we spring the trap." Commander Volza's skin flickered with doubt patterns. "This approach sacrifices too many soldiers in the center." "No one gets sacrificed," Susan insisted. "The center line falls back in stages, drawing the hive deeper into our position. They'll think we're routed." Jack nodded. "Meanwhile, our best fighters will be hidden here and here." He indicated the flanks. "When the hive commits fully to the center, they strike from both sides." Captain Zorn looked unconvinced. "This tactic relies on deception." "Exactly," Jack said. "Something the hive can't understand because they share one mind. They can't imagine deliberately appearing weak." The alien officers still hesitated, but they had no better options. With reluctance, Captain Zorn approved the plan. As the first light of the dwarf star crept over the ridge, Jack took position with a group of Xerxian soldiers in a shallow trench concealed by wreckage from the ship. Susan led another group on the opposite flank, hidden among large boulders. The center line looked pitifully thin, just enough soldiers to make the hive believe they faced the main Federation defense. Lieutenant Krex commanded this group, visibly nervous but determined. The hive attack began exactly as expected. Thousands of drones poured over the ridgeline, their chitinous bodies gleaming dully in the red light. They moved with singular purpose, headed straight for the damaged ship. The center line opened fire, cutting down the first wave. The second wave absorbed the losses without slowing. The third wave reached the defensive positions. "Beginning withdrawal," Krex announced over the comm system. His voice was steady despite the chaos visible behind him. The center line fell back in controlled stages, looking increasingly disorganized to create the illusion of panic. The hive pressed forward eagerly, sensing victory as the Federation line collapsed. Jack watched, counting silently, waiting for the perfect moment. More and more hive drones flooded through the gap, focusing entirely on the retreating defenders and the ship behind them. "Now," Jack said into his communicator when the majority of the hive force had committed to the center. From both hidden positions, Federation soldiers erupted into action. Jack led his group straight into the flank of the hive formation. Susan's team did the same from the opposite side. The hive drones, caught completely by surprise, turned to face these new threats in confusion. At that same moment, Krex's center force stopped retreating and formed a solid line, trapping the hive between three groups of Federation soldiers. What followed was not elegant or clean by Federation standards. It was brutal, desperate fighting of the kind humans had perfected over thousands of years of warfare. Federation soldiers fought with a ferocity their alien commanders had never seen before, inspired by the unexpected success of the human strategy. By midday, it was over. The battlefield was littered with destroyed hive drones. Federation casualties were minimal compared to the previous day's battle. Captain Zorn found Jack resting against a boulder, binding a wound on his arm. "Your plan worked," the alien captain acknowledged, "though not in any way I would have considered proper warfare." Jack smiled tiredly. "Proper warfare is a luxury. Survival rarely is." 3 Federation cruisers arrived 18 hours after the battle ended. They descended through the thin atmosphere with weapons ready, expecting to find nothing but wreckage and bodies. Instead, they found the survivors of the Bright Horizon, standing among piles of hive drone remains, tired but victorious. Jack sat on a medical cot inside the largest cruiser as a Polarian doctor treated his injuries. He had 3 deep cuts across his left shoulder and a burn along his ribs from a hive energy weapon. Susan occupied the next cot over, her right arm in a temporary cast. "The captain wants to see you both," Lieutenant Krex announced, entering the medical bay. The young Xerxian looked different now, his posture straighter, his manner more respectful. "When you're cleared by medical." An hour later, Jack and Susan were escorted to the cruiser's command center. Captain Zorn stood waiting with several high-ranking Federation officers they hadn't met before. One, wearing elaborate insignia, stepped forward. "I am Admiral Thex of the Federation's 7th Fleet," the older Exarchian said. "Captain Zorn has submitted an unusual report about your battle with the Hive." Jack remained silent, letting the Admiral continue. "He claims your unconventional tactics saved his crew when standard Federation procedures would have failed." Admiral Thex's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. "This is not a common admission from a Federation captain." "We just applied what we knew," Susan said simply. The Admiral gestured to a holographic display showing Earth. "We've discovered the Hive attack was merely a diversion. Their main fleet was positioning to strike your homeworld directly." Jack felt a chill. "Is Earth safe?" "For now. The Hive retreated when our fleet arrived." The Admiral studied them closely. "But they will return. The Hive never abandons a target completely." Captain Zorn stepped forward. "Admiral, I believe we must reconsider humanity's status within the Federation." The Admiral's scales rippled with surprise. "Explain." "These humans displayed knowledge of warfare that our doctrine doesn't account for," Zorn said. "Their history contains valuable lessons we've overlooked because we dismissed them as primitive or mythological." Lieutenant Krex nodded eagerly. "I've been studying their military history since the battle. Those stories Miller told, Thermopylae, the Alamo, Chosin Reservoir, they're all documented events, not myths." The Admiral looked skeptical. "Surely exaggerated." "No," said Commander Voles, entering the conversation unexpectedly. The Polarian's skin pulsed with earnest blue light. "I doubted too, but their historical records are extensive. Humans have fought wars that dwarf our conflicts in both scale and brutality." Jack watched this exchange with quiet satisfaction. The condescension that had colored every interaction since first contact was finally giving way to genuine respect. Admiral Thex turned back to the humans. "If what they say is true, your species has much to teach us about survival against overwhelming odds. And you have much to teach us about your technology," Susan acknowledged diplomatically. "A fair exchange," the Admiral agreed. "I will recommend immediate elevation of Earth's status within the Federation. We need your perspective on the Hive threat." As the meeting concluded, Jack found himself standing alone with Captain Zorn near a viewport. The damaged Bright Horizon was visible being towed toward one of the cruisers for salvage. "Your tactics troubled me," Zorn admitted. "They seemed uncivilized by our standards." Jack nodded. "Survival often is. Yet they worked where our methods would have failed." The captain's scales shifted to a thoughtful hue. "Perhaps there is wisdom in remembering that civilization is built upon the lessons of desperate times." "That's what humans do," Jack said quietly. "We keep the old knowledge alive alongside the new, not as myths, but as truth." As the cruisers broke orbit, setting course for Earth where a new chapter in Federation relations would begin, Jack knew that the aliens no longer saw humans as primitive newcomers to the galactic community. They had earned their place not through advanced technology, but through the hard-won wisdom of a species that had faced extinction countless times and refused to surrender. Some truths, it seemed, were universal after all.